This happened a few years ago when my friends and I had just finished our second year of college. Finally done with school for a few months, we wanted to celebrate a bit to kick off the summer break. We all had small jobs near campus, so we saved up a bit of money. We decided to go big and take a trip to Las Vegas for a few days since none of us had been there before. At first, we looked for hotels in the city to try and find something cheap, but big enough for the four of us. Eventually, we gave up and started looking on Airbnb because most of them were cheaper and bigger. We found some nice ones, but eventually settled on the largest one with the most rooms. A few weeks later, our Uber picked us up from the airport and took us to the house. Honestly, it looked even bigger in person, and we were all very excited to spend the next few days there. We all unpacked and relaxed for a few hours as we were somewhat tired from the flight. A few hours after sunset, my friend Alyssa and I were the only ones still awake. It wasn't too late, maybe around 8 or 8:30, but the other two decided to go to bed early. With not much else to do, Alyssa offered to take a walk outside and explore the neighborhood a bit. I agreed. I wanted to see some unique houses. I should mention that our Airbnb was a pretty nice house, and the neighboring houses were very nice too. It definitely wasn't a sketchy neighborhood or anything, so we didn't even really think twice about going for a walk. We walked out and down the street. After passing 6 or 7 houses, the street suddenly turned and connected to another cross street with houses on the side. It was odd though, because these houses were not like the ones we had just passed on our street. These were basically abandoned shacks, and I don't mean to be rude or anything. It was just really strange to see such a sudden change in houses. After just turning the corner, we continued a bit, noting the broken windows, missing mailboxes, and even the weathered empty signs on many doors. One house even had a sofa chair right in the middle of their front yard, torn and stained. We agreed to take the next turn back towards our Airbnb and head back, but a few minutes later we saw a small SUV approaching us from the end of the street with its headlights turned off. As I got closer, it started slowing down and finally stopped right next to us. An older woman, maybe in her 50s or 60s, rolled down the window and with a big smile said, "You two are so cute." She made weird gestures with her head and arms and acted very oddly. I replied with a quick thanks to end the conversation and make her go away. Luckily, it worked. She continued her journey down the street, and we too in the opposite direction. After a few minutes, we found the next turn and returned to the street with our Airbnb. We were both shaking and creeped out by the whole situation and just wanted to get inside and forget about it. But when we arrived in the driveway, we saw the old woman's SUV turn onto our street and start heading towards us again. We were halfway up the driveway when she stopped right in front of the house, but this time it was different. She just stared at us. She didn't say anything or have any emotions on her face. She just stared. Alyssa quickly went inside, and I followed suit. I heard the car continue down the street as I closed the door behind us. We stood there for a while longer, locking all the doors and checking the windows to make sure she didn't come back. After an hour, we agreed that we were probably okay. So we went to our rooms and got ready to sleep. The next day, we told our other friends what happened, and they were also quite creeped out. We finally told the Airbnb owner about the whole situation, and we even asked if we could cancel our 3rd day so we could go home earlier, and thankfully, she agreed. For the rest of that day, we decided to stay away from the house and spend time in the city to try and enjoy at least one day of our Vegas trip. We had a really good time, but as the night grew later, we were ready to call an Uber and head back home. During the ride home, I received a message from the owner asking if this was the woman from last night, with a screenshot attached. I opened it and saw a screenshot of the doorbell camera recording from the Ring, showing the woman standing outside my house. I replied to the owner, and immediately showed it to all my friends. We didn't know what to do, so we asked the driver to drop us off at a hotel parking lot just a few blocks from our house while the owner called the police. After about 45 minutes, the owner called me and said the house was clear and we could go back. But she mentioned that the police never found the woman. This obviously didn't make us feel any better. We arrived home and almost immediately started packing all our stuff so we could leave first thing the next morning. Nothing happened overnight or the next morning, but I can say for sure that none of us could sleep soundly. We got out of there as soon as possible and headed to the airport. This was definitely one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me, and I still think about it a lot. The only advice I can give is always check the area around your Airbnb before booking it. I don't know what she wanted or why she was stalking us, but it really scared me to think about what would have happened if the owner didn't have a doorbell camera, or if we stayed on the third day. Both my girlfriend and I were visiting my parents back in Michigan for a few days, and we didn't want to stay with them because, let's say, for obvious reasons. We finally found an Airbnb about 15 minutes from their house. A cute one-bedroom condominium. It was newly renovated and very modern, so not the cheapest option. The host seemed nice and had good reviews, but we noticed some comments that raised some red flags. Most of the negative comments mentioned weird experiences with the neighbors. Now, I've had crazy neighbors before, so I'm not one to judge. I just asked the host before booking, and he said his neighbor liked to interfere, and sometimes when people tried to enter the Airbnb, he got defensive. But he said he would let his neighbor know that we were staying there and what we looked like, so everything should be fine. On our arrival day, everything went smoothly. We met with the host who lived nearby, and he gave us the keys to the front door and the code to his apartment. We unpacked all our stuff and then went to my parents' house for dinner. I had a few drinks throughout the evening to deal with my mom, and before we knew it, it was 10 p.m. and time to head back to the Airbnb. We arrived at our rental place now. Each complex had 4 apartments, 2 on the ground floor and 2 on the top floor, and the one we stayed in was on the upper left. However, when we arrived, we could see a small figure standing between the window curtains of the apartment upstairs on the right. I immediately felt weird. Who just stares out their window like that? My girlfriend parked, and as I got out, I looked up again, and there she was, still staring at us as we both walked towards the entrance. I could see her features. You know how some people just have a crazy look? She was one of them. Her hair disheveled and her eyes wide open. She must have been at least 60 or 70 years old, and her facial expression, I had never seen someone so angry. My girlfriend inserted the key into the door and we went in, and unsurprisingly, we saw her standing on the stairs. She didn't say anything, she just stood there watching us. She was very small and round, but from the way she stood, you could see that her arms and legs were very skinny. My girlfriend and I glanced at each other for a moment, then we started up the stairs. We walked up while she stared at us, but surprisingly, she didn't say anything. Instead, she just stared at us with her creepy eyes. I kept looking back as my girlfriend entered the code, and we hurriedly entered the apartment. "What was that about?" my girlfriend whispered, looking at me puzzled. I shook my head because I was just glad she didn't try to talk to us. Nothing strange happened for the rest of the night until we heard knocking on the front door. I got out of bed only to find that my girlfriend was already awake. The knocking continued for maybe 1 or 2 minutes until suddenly it became quiet. I looked at the clock on my phone, and it was almost 4 a.m. Who would knock on the door at this time? My girlfriend walked towards the door, whispering that she would look out the peephole to see who was there. I followed her slowly as she checked it. She turned back to me and looked puzzled. Then she opened the door slightly to peek around, and I heard her gasp. "What?" I whispered, and slowly approached her. Lying outside the welcome mat in front of the door were dead rats. They looked completely torn apart, with only one of them still having their head attached. She closed the door, and we both agreed to contact the host later that day. I tried my best to sleep, but the images of the rats kept spinning in my mind, and after a while I looked at my phone, and it was already 6:30 a.m. Realizing that I wouldn't be able to sleep, I got up to make coffee, and as I did, I heard the neighbor's door slam. I looked out the kitchen window facing the parking lot, hoping to catch a glimpse of that crazy woman. And there she was, standing and staring at our parked car, not even looking inside it, just staring. She seemed very focused on her car for a long time, and then slowly turned her head to look directly at me. I jumped back a little, and immediately heard her scream horribly, as if she was being attacked. My girlfriend came out of the room, clearly startled, and we both looked out the window again. The neighbor stood there, holding her head while screaming at the driver's side window, reaching for the top of the car and starting to knock her head while shouting when they would never leave, when they would leave, and why they kept coming. I started recording for insurance purposes, and my girlfriend called the police, then the host. When the police arrived, she lay on the ground next to her car, which was only slightly damaged, considering what we had just witnessed. The host apologized excessively and said that this had never happened before, and refunded our entire trip. We watched her being taken away with a pickaxe, although it took her a while to comply. We never knew what was wrong with her, but my theory is something suddenly triggered, and we just happened to be the ones there when it happened. But I know that you have to consider every review when booking Airbnb, every single one. It's the end of April, and I'm moving from my home in Chicago to Nevada. I hired a company to pick up all my boxes and ship them to the new house just to make things a bit easier for me. I wanted to take a road trip there and stay at some hotels or Airbnbs along the way, just relaxing for a few days. The total trip would take about 30 hours, so I divided it into 3 parts and decided that I would drive for 10 hours each day and stay somewhere overnight. After planning the timing, I realized that I would have to stay at the far end of Nebraska. I browsed Airbnb looking for anything cheap, because Nebraska doesn't really have much to see. So I just wanted a place to stay for 8 hours, and then continue my journey. I found a small house with 2 bedrooms, although I didn't really need 2 bedrooms. The price offered was pretty good, so I didn't mind the extra space. However, I found it somewhat strange that they only displayed pictures of 1 bedroom, but that wasn't too important to me, so I booked it for the next night and prepared to sleep. In the morning, I finished loading my car with the rest of my belongings and started the journey. I left a bit later than I wanted to, but I thought it wouldn't be too much of a problem besides having to drive in the dark for a few hours. If you've ever driven through Nebraska, you'll know that it's very flat, with long stretches of hundreds of miles without any buildings in sight. A few hours after dark, I arrived at the Airbnb. It was located on a long empty road that I had passed through and on a small dirt path. Initially, I was somewhat disappointed because it looked more run down on the outside than they showed in the pictures. I reminded myself that I was only staying for a few hours just to sleep, so it wasn't too big of a deal. I grabbed a few of my bags and headed to the front door. Usually, the owners leave the key in a lockbox and give you a password, but the door didn't have a lockbox at all. In fact, it didn't have a key at all, just the usual doorknob you see on closet doors. I started feeling a bit uneasy, but I didn't have any other options and had to stay here. I opened the door and went inside, and to my surprise, it was actually pretty nice inside. It was small, but the living room and kitchen were well stocked and looked well maintained. I went to the first bedroom but noticed that it also didn't have a key. Fortunately, the second bedroom had a key, so that's where I decided to unpack my suitcase. There was one thing that made me really uncomfortable about this bedroom, though. Right in front of the bed on the wall was a small old door, maybe 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. Here's the original photo I took of this door inside the room. The longer I looked at this door, the more uncomfortable I felt, but there was no way I was staying in a room that I couldn't lock. I tried to open it just to check what was behind it, but it was locked from the other side. I assumed the owner might just store cleaning supplies in there or extra towels or something, but the store still gave me an uneasy feeling. I started feeling quite tired, so I just unpacked what I needed for the night and started getting ready for bed. I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing a soft knocking sound coming from the edge of the bed. Very faint, but the whole house was silent, except for the knocking. I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table and immediately turned on the flashlight as fast as I could. As I directed the light towards the edge of the bed, the knocking stopped. I'm not an easily scared person. Sure, I'd feel creeped out or nervous, but never scared. But there was something about that small door at the edge of my bed, and at that moment, it genuinely scared me. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and grabbed all my stuff and rushed out of the house as fast as I could. It was still very dark outside and I couldn't see much, but as I backed my car off the dirt path, I swear I saw a man lying on the ground behind the house. I drove down the road for maybe 30 minutes before stopping in a small town, and I parked in the grocery store parking lot just to sleep. I still don't know what happened at that Airbnb, but the creepiest part is that when I checked my phone in the morning, I saw that my message had been read just a few minutes after I sent it, but the owner never responded.